Good morning to everybody if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon to everybody else in Canada and the rest of the world. As Rena mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the opportunity of the older consumer. Let's just start by thinking about what we do as researchers. Most of the articles, research proposals that I see usually start with some sort of statistics. So, for example, we have 5.9 million seniors in Canada at the last count, which represents a 20% increase since 2011. And then we saw last year, for the first time, the number of seniors greater than the number of children for the first time happened in 2016. So then we present the statistics, and then we go on to typically identify a particular problem or issue that is associated with old age. So, for example, there's probably around about 500,000 people living in Canada at the moment who have dementia, or 33% of seniors will report some form of disability. And then in our article or our research proposal, we then go on to propose a particular solution to the kinds of problems that we've identified. For example, some sort of mobility aid for those people who have mobility impairments, or some sort of assistive device to perform a task, a system to monitor the health status of somebody, or some kind of alert system for people who have fallen, for example. So these are all the sorts of solutions we hear a lot about within our sector. Is that if we engineer a solution to the problem, then and that it fulfills a useful purpose, then it's going to be adopted by the end users that we've identified, and that they'll adopt these to meet their particular needs. So this is what I would say is a fundamental logic in many of the projects that we have in the technology and aging sector. That's fine as far as it goes, but let's just look at the impact that we've been having over the years. And certainly my take on all this is that despite several decades of research and development in the field of technology and aging, very little of that research and development has actually got into the market. Very little of the very valuable research that we do ends up in terms of products that are used by people in the real world. So I recently read the book Longevity Economy by Joseph Coughlin. So any of you who might have gone to the AAGG conference in San Francisco in the summer might have seen Joseph Coughlin, who presented. So he's from MIT's Age Lab. So he's the director there. He's written a book, Longevity Economy. This very problem. So, for example, he suggests or he identifies hearing aids. So hearing loss is a very significant issue for many older people. But typically, only about 20% of those people who could benefit from hearing aids actually use hearing aids. So there's a significant disjunction between the need, i.e. people who have some sort of hearing impairment and who might benefit from hearing aids, and those people who are actually buying them, adopting them, and using them. Another area where he identifies as being a very significant area of research, but where there's been very little adoption or take up in the market, is in the area of personal emergency response systems, or PERS. So this is where you know, if you have a problem that you're able, you know, say for example, a senior who's had a fall, or someone who's sick and incapacitated, some kind of system where they can raise an alarm with a caregiver or with a service provider, that kind of thing. So you may be familiar with Philips Lifeline, for example, which is, so in North America, probably 3% of over 65s have some kind of emergency response system. In Europe, and particularly the UK, where there's a much more strongly established market, that's around about 16%. But it's still a very small proportion of the potential market for this sort of technology. So these are two areas where clearly there's a need within the population, and there's certainly been a lot of research done and development in this field. But actually, the take-up of useful technologies has been quite limited. So what's actually going wrong here? And I think a fundamental problem is with our logic model that I talked about to start with. So older people, firstly, are not a homogeneous mass, and I'm going to be talking about this. We tend to think of older people as a set of problems. So, for example, when we talk about people with dementia, and we say 5% of people, 5% of over 65s are people with dementia. And we tend to forget that that means 95% of the population aged over 65 are living without dementia. So we really have to think about the different sectors within the older population. We also need to remember that older people are consumers. They don't necessarily make logical decisions, necessarily behave in the way that we think they should be. So usefulness, the usefulness of the products and the technologies that we develop is just one consideration within the market. So what I want to do in the presentation today is to challenge the logic model that we have. So instead of thinking about, which is our typical idea, that we think in terms of populations, in terms of end users, in terms of invention, in terms of solutions, that we should be thinking more in terms of markets. We need to be thinking in terms of consumers. We need to be thinking in terms of innovation. We need to be thinking in terms of products. So we need to challenge the logic that we have within our research and development process. We also need to think about what we need to be doing as researchers to reorientate the way that we do our research. If we're serious about real-world impact, I think we need to think about the way that we do things. Okay. So let's start with the title of Age Well. So this is maybe looks a little facetious that we're called Age Well rather than being called Age Bad. Okay. While that sounds a little facetious, I think the idea of age provided help and support to seniors over many, many decades. The services and the support we provided to seniors have really been at best okay, at worst contributed to the problems that many seniors have. So Age Well is really about reorientating things, and particularly to use technology to help. Let's go back to some statistics, though. Here are some really interesting statistics. So, for example, 5% goes to residential care, And these are statistics, again, which are coming out of BC. Probably about 15% of those people in residential care are inappropriately placed there because there is a lack of community and preventative services. So we've got some issues here. We need to rethink the way that we support and help people. About the fact that healthcare spending on seniors is reducing in relative terms. If we have limited finite resources that are being spent on healthcare and increasing numbers of seniors within the population, then you don't need to be a mathematician to work out that the per capita spending on healthcare is actually reducing. So with increasing numbers of older people, then our actual spending on each one of those is reducing. So this is one of the starting points of Age Well. Can we use technology as a solution to meet the needs of increasing older people, and particularly people who want to live at home? And can we use technology as an enabler to meet the evolving needs of an aging population? From AgeWell's point of view, there are no technology is going to make an impact in the near and the medium term. We have an increasing number of older adults. We've talked about that, but increasingly, we're seeing that older people are actually more tech savvy. One of the criticisms that we get a lot about is that, well, many older people don't know how to use technology. They're not interested in technology. That is certainly not the case, and increasingly not the case. If we look at the market sector on technology use, we can see that the older population is actually the over 65 population is the area that has the biggest increase in smartphone usage, biggest increases in internet uses, that kind of thing. We're also seeing a lot of changes in the technology side of things, with smart homes becoming a mainstream consumer technology. We see the developments in areas like artificial intelligence, robotics, pervasive computing, and the Internet of Things. All these are becoming mainstream. If we look at the area or the particularly technology on autonomous vehicles, we read almost daily about the development and the adoption of autonomous vehicles, with a lot of onboard technology already being in the marketplace, with the prospect of fully autonomous vehicles being in the mainstream in the next 5 to 10 years. We also can see that healthcare technologies are the next best thing, next big thing, with significant global investment in this area. And these sorts of technologies are becoming more mainstreamed, and also they're the sorts of things that Age Well are doing in order to exploit the potential of these technologies are aligned with federal and international priorities. If we look at the research sector, and I'm presuming most of the people who are online today are working within the research sector, we can see that there's been a significant change in the research landscape in recent years. There's been a number of major research and development initiatives in the field of technology and aging. So, for example, the Ambient Assisted Living Joint Programme, or AALJP, in the EU. So Canada is a part of this, and a Canadian project, Canadian projects can apply for this program. In Age Well, we have our own network of centers of excellence in Canada on aging and technology. There are many other international, national, and local initiatives. And these groups incorporate research into innovation as part of their portfolios. So the focus of all these are not just about research for research's sake. They're about research that are going to lead to innovation and real-world impact. So this is a major priority. So for those of you who apply to SSHRC or NSERC or to Age Well, there is a significant requirement for you to have KT plans or knowledge mobilization or commercialization plans that are going to lead to technologies that will have impact. We're also seeing research as no longer something that is done within a single lab or by a single researcher or a small team of researchers. Typically, research teams within Age Well, for example, are multidisciplinary teams that incorporate engineering, they incorporate information technologies, clinical sciences, social sciences, humanities, and business. So, for example, myself as a social scientist, I can't work within this field without working with engineers, without working with people in information technology. We see research teams being also multisectoral, with researchers working with industry, with government and service providers. And often these are geographically disparate levels, so international projects. So Canadian researchers participating in the Ambient Assisted Living Joint Program will be working with an international team of research. A third focus in this realignment is around significant end user involvement, so that end users, the people who are going to use the technology, are involved very much. So right at the start in trying to understand people's needs through the development process, and then in the trials of technologies to show that they're useful and acceptable. But not only as research participants, but also as contributors and stakeholders in the research process. So in setting the research agenda, that kind of thing. The sorts of challenges that we need to respond to. How do we respond to an older population? How can we improve the services that we provide to enhance people's quality of life? And particularly, how do we respond to people's desire to age in place? So let's just think about that aging place concept here. I actually think that phrase needs to be rethought and maybe reworded. Maybe we should describe this as how to respond to older people's desires to be normal and not to be seen as somebody with a set of problems that needs to have a set of solutions. People want to live normal lives. They want to live lives that are meaningful, that they want to live lives where they do things that they enjoy. And that's what we should be trying to do with the sorts of technologies that Age Well is developing. So I started my presentation about the population statistics. Let's try and start breaking that down a bit and say, well, while we talk about the aging population as the increasing numbers of people aged 65 and over, that kind of thing, let's start thinking about it in more discrete terms. So, for example, people coping with chronic disease, the level of chronic disease within the population increases as the population ages. Because of the increasing prevalence of age-related diseases. That's certainly something that we need to consider. So there are a lot of chronic diseases associated with old age. For example, dementia, we mentioned that already, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the sorts of mobility impairments that are associated with things like COPD, or with chronic diseases like arthritis, et cetera, et cetera. My father, for example, has angina. That has a significant impact on how he lives his life. So if we're looking at this particular group, the aim here is for early intervention to avoid hospitalization. It's really important that we that they have, so that they can live life at home, so that they can avoid hospitalization. This is seen as a win-win scenario because most people want to stay at home and live independently, but also from a service perspective, hospitalization is an expensive thing in the health service budget. So from a technology point of view, the need here is for self-management systems, as well as systems that are going to support community health professionals. So for example, I was involved in a research project several years ago looking at people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I interviewed one lady who'd admitted herself into the emergency room over a dozen times in 1 month. The main problem for this lady is that she became very, very anxious when she had an exacerbation of her problem. So she found it very difficult to breathe. When she found it difficult to breathe, she got anxious. And as she got anxious, that made it even more difficult for her to breathe. The solution to this, from her perspective, when she was on her own, was that she and the ambulance would come and take her to hospital. Not a good scenario for her, certainly not a good scenario for the hospital services. What we did there was to connect that lady with a community health service professional who was able to monitor her at home and to check up on her on a regular basis. And that was very effective in stabilizing that lady's condition. So chronic illnesses and associated disabilities, these are long-standing duration, ongoing medical care, has significant impact on the functional capacity and quality of life. Hospitalization, however, is expensive and disruptive. Not only is it expensive, disruptive, but it's also something that often precipitates disability. So hospitalization associated disability occurs in approximately 1/3 of patients older than 70 years of age. So while hospitalization might be a solution to a particular problem, it often leads to other problems in the longer term. So if we can avoid hospitalization, that's going to be a major benefit, not only to the person concerned, but also to our health services. Let's think of another sector here. Significant number of seniors will have some form of dementia. Lives, to over 20% of the over 80s will have some form of dementia. We also need to think about some of the new diagnostic categories that have come into play in recent years. So for example, one project that I was involved in recently was looking at the potential use of technology for people with mild cognitive impairment. So mild cognitive impairment are those people who have some sort of significant change in their cognitive abilities, but not to the level that would normally be classified as dementia. And typically, people with mild cognitive impairment have some form of issue, but are able to live more or less independently with probably with some sort of help and support around them. So one of the areas that we identified in that project was not so much with things like food preparation or those sorts of very instrumental activities of daily living, but more around things like managing their finances. Managing finances is a challenge to most people. For people with mild cognitive impairment, managing finances can be a very significant challenge. So, for example, if you trying to navigate the very complex systems that we all find difficult to use becomes increasingly challenging. What about people who are dependent on others or dependent on services, but are also isolated? This is a really important issue when we're thinking about the older people as technology users or consumers. We need to remember that 32% of people aged 75 live alone. The interesting thing here is that as researchers and technology developers, we tend to think of, well, they have a particular health problem or they have a particular condition that we need to focus on. However, I would argue that the needs of somebody who lives alone and those people who live with other people are almost entirely different. So again, let's have a look at the idea of a personal alarm system, a personal emergency response system. For a person who's living with a spouse or with another member of the family, the need for that sort of technology is probably not so significant. For those people who live alone, who are unable to raise an alarm or shout for help, that sort of thing, having some kind of system is in place to monitor them at home is going to be potentially a big help and support for their safety and security. So this is what we're talking about here when we're improving the connectedness of people who are living at home. So here we've got the potential to use telecare services to monitor and support people who live alone. We also need to think about people in long-term care. So while it's a relatively small amount of people, 5% of the over 65 population, these people are very frail, very vulnerable, very much dependent on others who are looking after them. One of the things that we need to think very much about long-term care is about how we can make long-term care more person-focused. Typically, in long-term care institutions, people's routines are very much geared around the routine of the institution that they're living in, the residential facility that they're living in. I don't know about you, I have my routines, but they're my routines. They're the sorts of things that I like to have. Fitting in with other people's routines is not necessarily the thing that the way that I want to live my life. So can we make the care that we provide in residential environments more person-focused? And I think, again, this is something that technology could play a part in. So, for example, Can we monitor the everyday routines of people, and to use that information to respond in a more person-centered way? Good example of this would be around people with dementia. Now, in my experience, people with dementia have lucid moments where we could be interacting with them in a more in a much more humane way than we typically do. Is it possible to identify these kinds of times in the day where we could then interact and contribute to a more to the sorts of care that is going to add to a person's quality of life? Okay, let's shift our attention to the healthy and active seniors, which actually represent the vast majority of people who are over 65. Most seniors are independent and lead active lives. So we need, in our approach, is prevention, to emphasize activity and social participation. We also need to look at the ways that technology tends to marginalize people. So if we look at if we look at the technology use within the population, we see that seniors do represent an under using population in terms of technology. I've mentioned that they're the biggest growing group, but we also need to remember that seniors are often amongst the poorest sectors of our population. And it's poor seniors who are often the part of the so-called digital divide. Those people who don't have access to the help and the support that is available online, access to the services that they could probably benefit from. So our focus within this sector needs to be about the online and mobile products and services to encourage and enable healthy lifestyles, good nutrition, rehabilitation, and economic and social participation. And in AgeWell, we have a number of projects which are focused on social connectedness, for example, focused on the largely healthy seniors that make up the majority of the over 65 population. Going back to my original perspective, we often create the problems by problematizing. Often the solutions that we think are going to solve the problem actually become the problem. And this is a significant issue when we look at not only care of older people in general, but also the technology solutions that we're developing. So I think we need to shift our focus to think about old age, not only in terms of problems, but also the opportunities that old age is bringing with it. And particularly, can we look at the return on investment in our own research efforts, and to say, well, okay, we want to have a social impact. We want to have an economic impact. We want to have an impact in terms of benefiting seniors within the population. If we shift our focus away from, say, the population of seniors over 65, and try to understand things more in terms of the market, and the phrase silver economy is a phrase which is increasingly being used nowadays. We can see that this is a much wider perspective than our very narrow focus on those particular health problems, and encompasses, for example, how to seniors within the employment sector, how seniors are participating within society, how we can help people to be independent and healthy and living securely. How can we help people to increase the capacity to live independently and live actively? How can we create supportive environments that are going to help them to live independently? So if we start to shift our focus onto these kinds of emerging markets, then we can see it's much broader than what we might typically think about when we think about technology and aging purely as health technologies or of technologies for assisted living. We can look at different clusters within the market. So for example, housing. So that might include information and communication technologies to augment the home environment, such as smart home systems, connected home systems, ICT-enabled services such as remote energy management, safety monitoring, and entertainment. Sorts of things that people like to do at home. Another important emerging of mobility and tourism. So again, using technologies to support tourism, such as hotel rooms that incorporate intelligence through ICT platforms, making transport systems more age-friendly. So for example, assistance systems within vehicles, the move towards autonomous vehicles, barrier-free environments, seamless accessible mobility, such as the provision of accessible information to travelers. Of course, health and long-term care is a significant area. We can see that there's been a lot of interest in technologies such as telecare, the integration of care over using technologies to integrate care across the different sectors, such as the health sector, the social sector, the direct-to-consumer sector. We also need to be looking at the how we can promote the well-being of seniors. How can we use technologies to in a preventative way? How can we enable people to or empower people to really manage the kinds of health conditions that they might have in later life? So this might include technologies such as digital technologies for coaching physical, mental, and social well-being, personal health devices, ICT solutions for nutrition support, that kind of thing. We also need to think about seniors as being assets within our communities as well. So for example, how can we help citizens to be active citizens within our population? So for example, this might include virtual communities and digital neighborhood platforms for community building. How can we help seniors to be volunteers and support the communities within which they live? And certainly, older people as citizens is a vital and a crucial contribution to our society. For those of you who have children, for example, how many of you are grandparents who are providing childcare, for example? Another area which is emerging within the silver economy is that of employment, education, and training. Accessibility and inclusiveness of the labor market is crucial to a healthy economy. Increasingly, people are not retiring those people who do retire at age 65 are not going to retire fully. They may be going into new types of jobs. They may be going into volunteer jobs, that kind of thing. They may be going into education. They may need retraining. So we need to look at the employment in the education sector. So the opportunity here is huge. The global silver economy is valued around $7 trillion per year, possibly reaching a projected 15 trillion by 2020. If we look at the healthcare sector, this is a huge sector as well. As I mentioned, the long-term care sector, a nursing home sector, is probably around about 24 billion, is a massive sector in its own right, probably around about 24 billion worldwide. Home care systems, for example, the sort of thing that TELUS Healthcare is trying to capture or work in, is probably around about 12 billion at the moment. The direct-to-consumer healthcare technologies. So, for example, the sorts of technologies that are integrated in wearables such as the iWatch is probably going to reach about 25 billion worldwide by 2019. So we're talking about here a massive kinds of technologies that AgeWell is developing. So I'm going to skip a few slides here and talk more about what we need to do as researchers in order to respond to the silver economy, the silver market. There's three things that we really need to do as researchers. We certainly need to be more market-oriented when we think of our research. We need to develop the kinds of expertise that maybe we have not developed in the past as researchers. And thirdly, we need to work closely with partners within our research. I'll briefly mention about these kinds of things that we need to do going forward. So if we're going to be more market-oriented as researchers and respond to the kinds of markets that we've been looking at here, we need to turn our attention away from the solutions that we think about and more towards the products and the technologies, the policies and services that are going to be used by people. So we need to think about who is going to be the customer for the technologies that we're developing. What are the products that we're going to develop for those customers? And questions such as, how are they going to pay for it? These are issues when we are looking at the adoption of technologies. So, for example, if we're looking at the long-term care sector, okay, there's lots of interesting technologies which are being developed for the long-term care sector, for the residential sector. But how are the residential homes, how are the nursing homes, the assisted living facilities, how are they going to take those technologies and adopt them? At the moment, it's a real challenge for them. What we want to do is to package our solutions up into some sort of system that is going to really going to be easy for them to adopt. So the concept that we're using at the moment is the easy button. How can we create a package of integrated technologies in long-term care that can be taken up by long-term care providers and can be relatively easily taken into their long-term care facility and integrated within the care model that they have. This is a really significant challenge for researchers. If we're simply going to focus on a particular problem or a particular technological solution and assume that it's going to be readily adopted into the long-term care sector. We need to think about, how is this going to be sold? How are we going to market it to the long-term care sector? these kinds of technologies? And how does it integrate with other systems and procedures? This is a real challenge for researchers. We need to develop expertise and knowledge outside our research comfort zone. This is not necessarily meaning that we're going to do it ourselves, but it certainly means that we need to build a team around our research that is going to work towards the productization and the adoption of technologies. We also need, as researchers, to develop our management skills. How many researchers have actually done basic management courses? While our focus in our research and training as academics focuses on our research, to get our research into the real world really requires us to manage quite a complex process. So again, we need to have the skills that are going to allow us to do that. And the third area where I think we really need to focus on is that, okay, as researchers, we're probably not going to do this ourselves. Okay, we might have a nice technology that, okay, we can maybe think about having a startup that is going to take that and we're going to work on this and commercialize it ourselves. But typically that isn't going to happen. What we really need to do is think about how we're going to work with partners. How we're going to work with partners or technologies and adopt them and take them and commercialize them. We need to avoid the technology push scenario where we are going to our partners and saying, well, this is a nice piece of technology. Can we try it out with you? And hopefully, if it works, you're going to adopt it. We need to work with partners right from the start to develop a research agenda which is around their needs, around their business objectives. And we need to make sure that the technology, that development that we do, it includes the end users of those technologies. And not by end user, not only the older person, but also the care provider who might be using those technologies. We need to test and evaluate our technologies in real world environments to make sure that they work, but also that they're effective solutions within the business model and the care models that are already in existence. So this is very much an action research approach. It's not just about saying, well, I've developed this technology, I'm now going to see whether it's going to work in whatever context it's going to be adopted. And partners are likely to be the major route to market. And also, interestingly, and I'm sure if there are students, PhD students, master's students online at the moment, partners are going to hire our trainees, our highly qualified personnel. It's this sort of a thing which is going to have a big impact in the future, that our trainees are going to work in the long-term care sector. They're going to work with companies who are providing technologies, the Googles, the Microsofts, and who are going to be the innovators in the future and have the understanding around the needs of seniors, the potential of technologies to meet the needs of this emerging silver economy. That is really going to have the impact in the future. So I'm going to draw it to a close there. We've got a few minutes for any questions and answers. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And if you could just go to the next slide as well. I think there might be one more after this. So just before we get into that Q&A, we have received quite a few questions throughout your talk. So I will bring them up just in a moment. But just a reminder for everyone to register for our upcoming webinars. These are the next two that are coming up, and I've put the link in the chat box, so feel free to register for those. And I'll give you our first question, which is from Belinda, and she's asking, do you see seniors involved directly in research to ensure it reflects the needs of seniors in the design of projects and technology?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely critical thing. Yeah, completely. We tend to see as research participants, maybe after the technology has been thought about, after it's been developed in a lab, and then we go out and okay, we'll try it in the homes of somebody. I think we need to think about the involvement of seniors as stakeholders in terms of developing our research agenda right from the start. We also need to think about older people as active research participants so that we are co-producing the technologies that we're developing. So bring them in at a very early stage. Try out ideas with them. So for example, one approach that I used a lot in my research was to do visualizations right at the start, which kind of map out what a technology might look like. And you get very good feedback really at an early stage before you start investing a lot of time, effort, and money into developing, a working prototype, that kind of thing. So for example, in one of our personal alarm system technologies that we were developing, we actually we commissioned a theater group to act out scenarios where this technology might be used. And we actually presented mini plays to an audience of seniors and got them to contribute right at the start thoughts, what they liked or didn't like about the technology that we were proposing, and got some really very useful insight into their perspectives, so that we could incorporate that into the technology as we developed it. And certainly we would have made some start. And also it really highlighted some of the potential strengths of our approach as well. One of the things was in this technology was the use of avatars. I was a little skeptical about that. And when we presented this as a kind of a visualization, we got and that convinced me that that was actually quite a good solution to the to what we were trying to do. So
Great,
yeah, definitely co-production, definitely involving the potential end users all throughout the research process.
Thank you, Andrew. So we do have, we're just about out of time, and we have quite a few questions.
Okay.
Still unanswered, but they're mostly from one person, so perhaps you can connect with her. But I will ask one of them just for the benefit of the audience. So I'll ask one more question. So it's Catherine Wayne. She's asking for you to expand on the notion that older people prefer to be treated as normal, and that our research and development should focus on facilitating normal lives, and does that mean AgeWell would focus uniquely on the relatively young, old, and the relatively unimpaired? I mean, I know we focus on both, and you kind of talked about healthy, active seniors, but maybe just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that we should focus on particularly on the healthy and the active seniors. I certainly in our sector, there's going to be a lot of focus on sick and frail old people. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do research around people who are frail, who have chronic diseases, that kind of thing. But what we should think about is how we can help people to live as normal a life as possible, whatever the circumstances, whatever their conditions that they're living in. Everybody has aspirations. Everybody wants to do things that they like to do. What we shouldn't do is think about people simply as a collection of problems. And that's what we typically have done. That's what we've done for time immemorial when it comes to the way we provide care for seniors. What we really need to think about is to try and look at things from their perspectives. What do people want? what's meaningful in their lives. So for example, I did a project a few years ago which basically said, well, let's forget about the problems. What contributes to a person having a good life? What contributes to people having a good quality of life? What do they enjoy doing? And this was for a project with people with significant memory impairments, with cognitive impairments, that kind of thing. One of the major outputs of that project was to develop an easy-to-use music player. And this is one of the successes that I've actually had in terms of turning a technology into a real-world product. You can now buy that easy-to-use music player. You can, and it's marketed worldwide. And really, this is something which I feel which is contributing to not just helping a person in terms of their problems, but also, well, how can I actually make life worth living? Okay.
Great. Yes. So I have a kind of like a follow-up comment, and maybe we'll just end with this follow-up comment from the audience, from Leslie. So she's saying, I understood the comment about normal to mean that solutions might vary. Independent living might be the desired situation, or it might not. Might that be considered a form of co-production? So as your last question.
Yeah, I agree on that. Let's think about people as human beings, with needs and weaknesses and frailties and aspirations, and and as researchers, if we're going to understand that, we've got to work with them very closely. Otherwise, the technologies that we're going to develop are going to miss the mark.
Great. So lots of questions still coming in.
Okay.
Maybe I'll take this last one, and just please note that this webinar slide, I know it says 2017 on there for these webinars, but they are in fact in 2018. So that's a typo there. So a question from Jane: why is it that folks over 65 are labeled as older people, seniors, aging population, older adults, etc.? All arguably judgmental labels, while other age groups are labeled as Gen X, Gen Y. So that's an interesting question. I don't know if you have an answer for that, but it's an interesting point of discussion.
Very difficult to get out to the mindset and the discourse around aging as being 65 and over. It's kind of ingrained in the way we define the aging population. Certainly, I'm as guilty as anybody of falling into the trap of labeling everybody with the same in the same way. We have to fight against that. I think we need to think about people as human beings. We need to think about their different circumstances. We need, and that not everybody can be just grouped into a homogeneous mass. Totally agree on that one.
For sure, and I think that's a great note to end on. I know there are a couple of other questions that didn't get answered, but again, feel free to email us directly or email Dr. Andrew Sixsmith with your questions, and we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you, Andrew, for a great presentation. And again, as a reminder, please register for our upcoming webinars. They are both in 2018, the next one on using technology to detect pain in older adults with dementia on January 23rd. So thank you again.
Thank you.